It's so wonderful to have you here on the Everyday Mystic. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Carissa.
I was really so pleased to hear from you, get your book, read your book. I just finished it a couple days ago, and it was such a beautiful read. I mean, you obviously put everything out there, your heart on your sleeve, the sharing of your story in such a vulnerable way. And it's written so beautifully. It was like a page turner for me. I didn't want to put it down and
Oh,
wanted to read it all. And I was rooting for you, even though it's like, I know what ended up with you because you're coming onto my podcast. You're here, you're healthy, you're in great space. It's like, I knew already what was the outcome, but as I was reading it, I was rooting for you and I was rooting for little Jana as I read it. So it was written so beautifully that way.
oh, thank you. Yeah, memoir is interesting, right? It reads like a novel. So imagine while I was writing it, taking myself back. I'm 57, so that's a long time ago. To take myself back and really, how did it feel living in that house? What was the temperature? How did it smell? Like, how did my dad smell? What did his breath smell like? Like, you begin to really relive it. And of course, I've done so much healing, right? At 19 years, I've been an emotional healing educator. And but it's like we don't arrive, right?
Mhm.
The
Did you
journey
find,
continues.
yeah,
Yeah.
did you find that in the reliving of the smells and the feelings that you had at those times that it dug up a lot for you to reheal? Did you go through the need
Yes.
to process and
Mhm.
reheal?
Absolutely. I went into it. I hired a developmental editor to work with me, and she cautioned me. She said, when you're writing, be sure that you take time before and after. And I was like, oh, honey, I've been doing this work for a long time. This old childhood wounds, they're healed. They're not going to refester or anything, but some of them did. And there were actually times that I had to take things out, that when I leaned into little Jana, my emotions, it felt a bit exploitive. And I certainly didn't want to do that to myself, and I shared a lot. I was very transparent, but there was a lot that I withheld. One thing, to protect people who are still alive, that it could have affected their lives. And I didn't want to do that. Even if I would have changed the names, it would have still. But yeah, there were times where I would get spun out, and thankfully I have a nice toolbox of spiritual tools that I teach, but I had to be very gentle with myself. Yes.
Did anything new come up for you that you had never processed before?
I mean, it's not necessarily, it was just deeper layers. It
Mm.
was also beautiful in the fact that I fell even more in love with myself and all that I've done to get where I'm at, because it was viewing my story through the lens again of the little girl, which I begin the story in 2015. I have a mystical experience with myself after leaving a meditation retreat in Esalen. And that little girl showed me my life. So it was almost like that 2015 experience was really setting me up to write the book. I had wanted to write this book for so many years, but like anything, it just wasn't time yet. I was still healing with my mother. She ended up, as you know, passing away from Alzheimer's last year, but during 2015, I mean, she was still alive. It was still a lot of turbulence. A couple of years after that, she came to live with us. These are things I didn't share in the book. And
Mm.
she had, dementia. Of course, Alzheimer's is a variation of dementia. We hadn't had her diagnosed yet. And of course, with the history of abuse that I had with her, and then with her mental illness, I wasn't sure what was happening, but she attacked me in my home. I was newly
Mm.
married at the time. It was just still a lot of chaos. I still hadn't got to the other side really until last year,
Mm.
you know?
Wow. And
Yeah.
And was writing the book and the process of writing it a means to getting to the other side too, of
Oh,
reliving,
yeah.
recounting? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's memoir can be so healing. I tell people that even if you don't or want to write a whole book, you don't want to publish, you don't want it to be out there, to write that for yourself even is
Mhm.
so powerful. This
It is cathartic. Yes.
yeah. And you can re-story your life in that way, right? Look at it through different lenses and really start to change some of which change the emotional, certainly, patterns that you have around something, and even start to change the uh well, I mean, you can change everything, really. It's like not the incident. It's like you can't change the incident, but everything else, the experience of it, you can change, which
Well, the
is
way, A
incredible.
Course in Miracles says a miracle is a shift in perception. And so you can't really write memoir and allow a reader the space to read it if you're not healed. They'll feel it in the writing. And there
Mm,
were a few stories I had to take out when I was honest with myself that I haven't fully, unpacked, and it felt icky. You can feel it. And one of my teachers, Natalie Goldberg, who teaches, she's written a lot of books on
mm,
how to write memoir. She lives here in Santa Fe. And she had said to me, you can't put anything in the book that you haven't fully healed, because of course there's going to be people who have their own opinions and, review of the book. And if it's not healed, then the pain of that feedback or that review is going to be a lot to handle. Once you've healed something, then you realize, what other people think of you doesn't matter, because right? You've healed within yourself. It doesn't affect you. You're
mm,
just informed by it, right? That's kind of the distinction. Am I affected by something or am I informed? And I feel really good, writing a book and then getting a publicist. It takes a while before you can publish the book, right? Because it takes a while to get the message out, to share it with people, to let people know, hey, I've written this book. And, it's kind of like a movie. They don't make a movie and the next month, the movie's out. It usually takes about 6 months to a year of publicity before they'll even release a movie. Same thing with the music industry, but books are different. And so I've had a lot of time. The book's been finished since the first of the year. So I've had about 6 months of just really settling, and it's been a beautiful gift to give to myself. At first I was anxious. I wanted to get it out,
mm,
but it was like, no, I had to slow down. And then the feedback was great, because during this time I can make tweaks to the book. Like, one person said there should be a trigger alert. So I added an author's note, right? Where I
mm.
said, I'm not going to apologize for what I share in this, because what you can't feel, you can't heal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But giving people that fair warning, like we're going to go into
Exactly.
some deep, dark places. And
Yes.
yeah, I actually did find one night when I was reading one of the chapters, I think I had wrapped maybe one of the chapters where you did share some of um, one of the scenes of some of the darker abuse, and I had a hard time falling asleep. I was just like, whew, okay, I've got to go. And I did some, release processes, and
Yeah.
I did my thing to get into the right space, but it was so emotionally impactful. I cried while I read it.
Um,
It was a really cathartic experience to also read it. And, I did not suffer physical abuse like you did, but other abuses and certainly other traumas. And I think there's a universality to what you've written and what you've been through for everybody. So even if you've not experienced, what you experienced, everybody experiences loss and grief and trauma and some level of not being recognized. I mean, yours was magnified in so many ways, but I think anybody who's ever felt that can resonate with and
Mhm.
feel into that experience. And it's all relative, right? So for somebody who may have not been recognized by a parent, not abused, but just not recognized, that can feel as harsh to
Mhm.
that person because they didn't have anything else to relate
Too. Right.
it to or compare it to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, there's different archetypes of childhood trauma. And so I'm, trained in somatic therapy and trauma informed therapy. And when we go through trauma as a child, children don't have, right, the rational defensive structures of the brain. It's not fully developed till we're in our mid 20s. We should not be making any big decisions under that age. And, but so for me, the trauma of, not being seen or heard. Of course, I wasn't seen or heard often, but that was such a minute trauma that it gets pushed down. But I work with clients every day, parents who live vicariously through them, parents who don't model good boundaries, right? Parents who can't regulate their emotions. These are all traumas to a child. Of course, I had all of those and then some. In adverse childhood experiences, there's 10 questions. Have you ever heard of that test?
Faces, yes.
Yeah. And I answer yes to all 10. And, so my trauma, but that's why I wanted to write the book, to inspire people to say, hey, you know, yes, I've got a broken finger and she has a broken leg, and maybe that's a bigger deal, but still, she managed her way through it, not only through it, but to create an inspiring life and to support others. So that was my real intent in writing the book. Of course, to leave a legacy to my grandchildren. I have one grandson and possibly another one on the way. I'm really excited.
Mhm.
But yeah, to leave a legacy and to say, we broke a cycle. I broke a cycle in a very intergenerational trauma family, just generation after generation, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and that is to be in that role is requires so much strength and power and courage. I know that you had an experience that when you were 12 of this knowing coming to you. Do you want to describe what that was like?
Well, so this leading up to that, Carissa, I had a lot of suicide ideation. I remember really clearly my mom always had Valium, so I was, contemplating stealing those and taking a bottle. And only 12, and we're already at prepubescent, it's a lot's going on during that time anyway. I just didn't feel enough. I had already came from a very intense traumatic experience earlier with my mother, and it just, nothing felt like it was letting up. I had a really um, easy way to connect to spirit, and that's what sustained me. But during this time before this event, well, I'm about to share, it I couldn't connect to spirit. I was very disconnected and alone, not lonely, alone. The existential crisis I was in, of course, was why I was having the suicide ideation. And so I'm absolutely certain that that's why spirit pulled me out of my body. So what I had was a near death experience. I didn't know that until many years later. I was watching a documentary, and a woman who had almost drowned explained the
Mm.
same experience that I had.
Wow.
I was like, what? She had the same experience I had. So dad's beating mom. A lot of chaos is going on. My brother's not there. He was always kind of my protector and my resource of stability to hold on to. He wasn't there. He's 14 now. He's out with his friends. I'm alone. I run outside praying to God to save me, and I get pulled out of my body. Before I knew what happened, I felt a really deep sense of peace, like a peace that passes all understanding, like a peace that I remember thinking, if I'm dead, I'm good with this. I was like,
Mm.
wow, this feels really good. And I could still hear the fighting, but all of a sudden I could see myself. I was out of my body, above myself, watching, but I was far above. And when I looked around and I kind of, was inquisitive, like, what's going on? I had this thought. I've always been clairaudient, where I can hear. I heard, those are not your parents, and that is not your life. And I could see my little self, and it was almost like I could see the small provincial town and the center of Florida, the South, kind of the oppression of it. I could see it all. And then I just saw I was like in the cosmos, and I could like reach out and touch a star galaxy or
Mm.
nebulas, and it was like I was being cradled. And then as soon as I had that experience, I was back in my body. It was very fast.
Mhm.
But everything changed. The awakening was so profound, that it just set me on a trajectory from that point. I mean, of course, I went to high school and I kind of fell back to sleep somewhat, but
Mhm.
not really. I was still very aware. And by the time I was 19 in college, I really got serious. And that's when the books appeared and the mentors and the teachers. And, it just began the path. And here I am, 57. So I've been on this journey for a long time. And, yeah, that awakening was, I can take myself back there, Corissa, and feel the feeling.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I've described that feeling to others as being more real than the real of
Mhm.
this experience of, being here and, in this concrete, what seems so real. But because I've had experiences like that, and it felt more real than this.
Mhm.
And that that's the only way that, or it's kind of one of the best ways to describe it. It's so unreal to talk about something like that and to describe it, but when you experience it, it's like, oh no, this is real. This is the most real, unreal thing that's ever happened.
Deepak he would say, you're eavesdropping on the mind of God, Jana.
Mm, what a cool way to put it.
When you have these mystical experiences. And of course I've had so many since then, and they, because I romance spirit a lot, I romance the mystical side of life, I romance and woo it. You create space, you create altars, music, smells. I live in nature. I live on 11 acres off the grid. So for me, there's nothing more important than my connection to spirit, because I'm not of this world, right? Like Jesus said, be in it, not of it. I understand that I am this human playing a role, but this isn't who I really am, right? I'm the consciousness that's aware of these roles I'm playing in this, in this experience. And, that requires a big commitment of daily meditation, of daily wooing spirit. At the
Mm,
Chopra Center, we used to have um, a, well, Dr. Simon was Deepak's partner. And we used to say, we came for Deepak, we stayed for Dr. Simon. He was a really brilliant man. He passed away. He diagnosed his own brain tumor. He was a neurologist, but we had a retreat there. It was called Seduction of Spirit. And he would talk about it. And I thought, oh, I love that languaging, of wooing. Like your
mhm.
beloved, you would make space and you would create a beautiful environment. And so I feel like that's what we need to do. It's required to connect to spirit, right? To slow
Mhm.
everything down, and
Yeah.
those experiences become not so mystical and few and far between. They become daily. He used to
Right.
say, who here's had an out of body experience? A few people might raise their hand. He said, everybody should be raising their hand. If you're a meditator, every day you're in witnessing awareness. You're coming out, watching yourself,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yes. And to get to a place where that is your daily life, where that is the real life, and the other thing is the thing you watch and the thing that, that just goes on and happens, you gain a sense, don't you, of not just the world being different than what you were raised in or what you were told it was, but how you interact with it. So tell us how you interact with the world in a way that keeps you grounded, because you're a very grounded person. I've met many spiritual people who are, they're out there, they are disconnected to this human experience. And that's how they choose to live. And it's very hard to have a conversation with them or to connect to that person, because they're not just not of this world, but they're not being in it either.
Right.
So what do you do to I guess feather those two experiences so that you do stay grounded and can be connected to your children and your human experiences as well?
Yeah. Well, I do believe my soul called me to Santa Fe, New Mexico. In 2006, my daughter went away to college, and there was definitely a soul calling. I was in California for a few years, but I kept coming back here. And so the high, it's high, right? I'm at 7,400 altitude where I live, my home,
Mhm.
and it's just surrounded nature. It takes front stage here, right? It's not buildings, it's not commerce. I'm very much a material girl. Like, I enjoy materialism. I enjoy beauty. I enjoy beautiful things and experiences, but those things don't define me, right? Every day, my teacher, David G., who gave me a beautiful review for the book, it was just so heartwarming. He's written 3 books, but one of them, Sacred Powers. He always said RPM, rise, meditate.
Mhm.
And that's what keeps me grounded, is my practice. Because when I get up, it's the first thing I do before I do anything. It's spiritual hygiene. So I get up, and as above, so below. Yes, I'm connecting with upper realms. I'm, connecting with upper dimensions. I'm leaving my body. I'm not aware, right? Because I'm gone when I meditate. I mean, sometimes the mind's turbulent, but eventually, I'm doing about an hour a day. That practice keeps me grounded. Also, Thich Nhat Hanh, one of my teachers, Tay, he Vietnamese Buddhist monk who passed away a couple of years ago. Walking meditation. When I walk with my dogs, I'm home. I've arrived. I'm home. I've arrived. Each step I take, realizing this present moment is it. I'm here. I've arrived. There's nowhere to go, right? And then there's 4 soul questions that Deepak trained us teachers to always ask and tell our students to ask prior to meditation. One is, who am I? And this, of course, is why we suffer. We don't know the answer to this question. And the answer to this question, who am I, is I am divine. The creator isn't living outside of me, it lives within me. And so when I identify myself as this divine being, I, that keeps me grounded, because now I'm not attached to my personality and to the roles I play. The second question is, what do I want? And of course, it's always peace. The answer is always the same, because I figure if I have peace, then everything else must be going great because I'm at peace, right? It's the ultimate. And then how can I help and serve? Each soul is here to serve some dharma, some purpose. Dharma in Sanskrit means my purpose. My purpose happens to be helping people use practical, down to earth tools that are easy to learn. The emotional healing system I created, and that's my purpose. But sometimes my purpose is paying a compliment to someone, or all of a sudden someone comes to mind and it's reaching out and saying, I'm thinking of you. We have a purpose to show up in life and mirror back to others their own divinity when they can't see it. And then the last is, what am I grateful for? And so I think it was Meister Eckhart who said, if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, it's enough. So because the mind has a lot of space when you meditate, it's not filled with so much constricted thoughts. As I walk about my day, or, whether I'm doing a mundane chore at home, or I'm driving my car, or I'm shopping, or whatever, I'm pretty present. And in that present moment, I'm always offering gratitude. And people are like, oh, you're really lucky, or, you have really great manifestation. Yeah, because I live in a state predominantly of gratitude.
Mhm.
And if I'm not grateful for something that's happened, I'm usually thinking about something in advance I'm grateful that's going to happen.
Right. Let's just set the stage, get prepared, and be
Exactly.
grateful for that thing that's coming in. Absolutely. I love that you shared that just by doing this kind of work on yourself or with yourself and reflecting that out in the world is enough too. I think oftentimes people think, oh, now how am I going to serve if I go out and be a healer or go out and write a book or go out and be, preach about all of this stuff. And just by the sheer act of working on oneself, healing, and then reflecting back that light and that love to other people is enough. Like you don't have to go and become a best-selling whatever if that's within you and within your
Right.
purpose, absolutely. Like it would be a shame if you didn't do that. But if it's not within your purpose is to, you know, craft small objects or raise kids or whatever it might be, then that the work you do on oneself is enough and so profound.
And
And
during
we
my
all
30s too, Carissa, during my 30s, like you, I kept hearing spirit say, if the only thing you do in this life is raise this human that you gave birth to and raise her well, that's enough. That was my purpose then. But then as she grew and I realized, oh, I'm going to have empty nest. I better get, to work. I better have some passion of my own. I can't be helicopter mother forever. Right. And so then I began, but you're right. I mean, our purpose, one thing that you brought up reminded me, have you read Spiritual Bypassing by, it's a wonderful, wonderful book.
haven't.
Can't think of the author's name right now. But anyway, he talks about teachers like myself who have not gone to the depths of the darkest places in their psyche and faced it, can't support their patients, students, clients to do that deep work. And I just came out of a retreat. I lead private retreats with my husband, who's a physician here. We have a healing center on our property. And we had 3 men here. One was a psychiatrist, because we work with a lot of physicians. It's called Healing the Healer, because
Mm,
healer, heal thyself.
right.
And we had a young man from Colorado, which it would be like what you described earlier, lives up in the clouds, isn't grounded. He's a Palladian from another. Listen, I'm open to everything, right? But you're here now. You need to be here and ground, and there's very practical things that you've got to do every day. So I'm a very strict teacher,
Mm,
right? Like, to me, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And it's like any kind of, like, even martial arts. I'm really fascinated with like Japanese culture and samurai, and I'm interested, my husband and I both, and what draws us the most to it is the discipline, right?
mhm.
The structure, because you have to have that before you can go flying off, and right, if you
Right.
don't have that clear daily structure. But the one young guy, and then there was another guy from London, but the youngest guy, he couldn't handle the structure. He kept pushing up against the structure. Make your bed, I would tell him. You have to do these things while you're in this space. I'm holding a container. You must abide by my rules, because this is for your highest good. He had a very hard time doing it,
Mm,
and he made me wrong. And I just think to myself, my husband said, you're so brilliant at how you can handle when people really push up against you, because
mhm,
they do. But
mhm.
my story,
Yeah.
that dragon slayer in me, that strength, when I had to stand up to my father, there's pretty much, I don't think anybody on this planet that I'm afraid to stand up to.
Mhm.
He was a monster. And I, at 12 years old, said, after that out of body experience, said, no more. And I stood up, right, and said, you're a hypocrite. You both make me sick. I was like, yeah, I got a beating, the first one I ever got from him, or thrown across the the trailer, but something inside of me ignited and I gave birth to it. And that's the part of me when I'm working with someone, I can go really dark places.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and right, and have the courage to stand up to anyone who might be challenging your challenges, right? And we all can be mirrors to each other in that way. It's a fascinating world of reflection and
Projection. Yeah.
projection and reflection. Yeah. Going back to what you said about your father and being a monster, did you, I would imagine you did, but get to a point, and what got you to that point of maybe seeing him as a gift in your life that, his presence and the things that he put you through created or awoke you to who you are now and what you've become? Was there a moment in time that you can recall where you were like, wow, he initiated me into this,
Hmm.
and felt maybe even gratitude towards that?
Yeah, when I was younger, I love my dad so much because he really put me on a pedestal. He violently abused my brother and mother and didn't me. So I was really, saved in that way. That was the only time when I stood up to him that he was violent with me. So I had a very, you know, no one's inherently all bad, right? So dad had this, but probably it was once I started in my early 20s really getting into family of origin, understanding adult children of alcoholics, understanding his sickness. My mother too, she loved him so much. They'd been together since they were children. They had known each other. And so, she really she and one of the things she did, I think, well with my brother and I is she would tell us that your dad is sick. He has a sickness. Of course, she did too. And she never spoke bad about him. She let us make our own decision. So she didn't alienate or, create sides and stuff, which was
Mhm.
very helpful. So as I got older, I was able to make decisions that I can't be in a relationship with you unless you're healthy. And of course, he didn't like that because he still wasn't healthy. But even in the end, as you know, I mean, he called to me his soul. One
Mm.
time I was leading a retreat in San Diego. This is like probably 15 years ago. And I remember I was talking about him. I was sharing a story. And of course, it was negative. And
Mm.
all of a sudden, his spirit showed up, and I just stopped, and everybody's looking at me, and tears came to my eyes. And it took me a few minutes before I could even speak again. And I heard him say, "Wasn't there anything good? Do you
Mm.
always just focus on the bad? Like, wasn't there something good?" And there was. As there was the silliness in me. I create all these silly names for my dogs and my children and my, my, I'm, the goofy, the fun loving, my dad had a funny personality and I got that from him. Right. But once I read Dr. Brian Weiss's book, Many Lives, Many Masters, and I adopted reincarnation as a belief system, and that's how I look at everything, it all made sense. It made perfect sense. Oh, my soul chose him and my mother because there's some greater purpose that I have. And I'm a pretty badass soul because I chose them. Because
Yeah.
I must have something to give to this world. And then once I took full responsibility that I chose them, whether I know that's true or not, it empowered me.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for saying that too, even if you don't know it's true or not, because we can move through life with and establish these beliefs that we don't have to prove, right? We can just say, I believe this, and then it creates an effect and a result that is what you want and that is positive. So go with it. It doesn't have to be proven, right?
Exactly. That's what I tell clients, because I work with people when I do. Now I'm pretty selective with private work, obviously. I've been, for 5 years plus years, I've been booked out 6 to 12 months, for
Mm.
private work. So when I interview someone, it's usually about an hour and a half interview. And these are the topics we talk about. Are you open? Do you believe in wrong? Okay, no, I'm Christian, or I'm this, that's against my beliefs. Okay, well, I'm not the teacher for you, because I'm going to challenge you. Because if your beliefs were working, you probably wouldn't be coming to me.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's time to upgrade your belief system. I tell them it's like we have like an operating system, and it goes back from childhood, and the operating system got created in those developmental years. I share it in my book, my parents, what I believe their operating system was. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I'm bad. All of these false narratives that we take on as children, we forget about them, but they operate us. Then we attract circumstances and situations and relationships and people in our lives that keep mirroring back that core operating system. And so, that's the big key, is upgrading the operating system, right? And so whether or not we know no one knows what happens after we die. But if I take on a belief that empowers me, wouldn't I want to do that versus something that's disempowering me or making me fearful?
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, there's plenty of stuff coming out from there to create fear. It's like, let's not create
Exactly.
it also in here. Yeah. I want to go to something that you mentioned in your book. You early on, I think, when you were going out and becoming a career woman, working for yourself, that you really started powerfully visualizing, and maybe you even did earlier than that, powerfully visualizing what you wanted, what you wanted to create. And well, actually, I do remember a story from your book where you did do that earlier, and I believe you manifested your trip to Costa Rica. That was the
Mhm.
story. And so you did this very early visualization, but it sounded, at least from the way you wrote it, that you didn't know what you were doing necessarily. You were just trying to escape your current circumstances and just feel okay.
Mhm.
Is that accurate?
It was disassociation. So I was
Yeah.
disassociation. From the time I was little, I lived in my imaginary world. Children love imagination. So my imagination, I love to read. I was definitely a bibliophile. The library was one of my favorite places to go. And but my imagination, playing with Barbies and doing, even manifesting Elvis to invite my mom and I to his hotel suite, was a manifestation of my imagination, because I lived in this imaginary world where he was an extended family of our, member of our family. So I look back now and I think, oh, there's no coincidence. I mean, the fact that we were allowed into a barricaded, and he had already left the venue long before we even got on the road. I mean, all of it, how it orchestrated. Then, of course,
Yeah.
the Costa Rica. I mean, everything, my whole entire life, until even now meeting my husband,
Hmm.
right? My now husband, I manifested that. So yeah, I've been using the power. Einstein said imagination's more important than knowledge, because imagination will take you where knowledge never could. And so I think about the child within us lives in imagination. When we were little, Krista, we believed we could be the president. We could do anything. We believed in ourselves and
Hmm.
what was possible. And there are infinite possibilities. You and I now know quantum physics says to us that things aren't solid. They're mostly space, right? It's infinite possibilities. So anything's possible. My book getting picked up by maybe Reese Witherspoon, and she does a Netflix series. I don't know. I mean, anything's
Hmm.
possible if it's in the highest good for me and for all sentient beings. The key is remaining detached, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Simon, going back to the Chopra Center, he would always say the most detached wins, right? Because when we're attached and we don't get something, then we suffer, right? Our attachments. So staying detached but yeah, my imagination still, and it's one of the things I teach, is how to script. I'm the leading lady of my movie called Life. If my movie is on the screen of my movie, if I'm experiencing things that I don't like, that I would like to have a more pleasurable experience, well, it's somewhere in my projector that I'm shooting through the lens of my perception. So I have control over it. So I'll sit down and I'll script out what I'm desiring. And a lot of people will say, well, I don't know what I want. And I always say, oh, that's not true, because you know what you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with what I don't want, and then what do I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a retreat coming up in September. Well, I don't want less than X amount of enrollees. So I'm like, okay, what do I want? I want this. And then you just script it out with elevated emotion, right? So when we're coherent, I'm a HeartMath facilitator. You're familiar with HeartMath,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in
Yes.
HeartMath, the heart's 5,000 times stronger than the brain. The heart radiates about 3 to 5 feet from the body. When you're coherent in your heart, the heart sends more ascending connections to the brain than the brain to the heart. So it's picking everything up in this field, right? That's why we feel people's energy and everything. But all it takes to manifest is a coherent heart filled with gratitude, appreciation, some elevated emotion, and then a clear intention about the future, what you want. And if you do it enough throughout the day, eventually, as Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, said, synchronicities, meaningful coincidences begin to happen, like
Mm-hmm.
little morsels on the path that lead you to what you desire. It really
Mm-hmm.
isn't difficult. It's just most people don't have the emotional intelligence or the knowledge. They lack the knowledge, right? Because maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're soul age, maybe they're not ready for it. A lot of people operate from victim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that right, there's no lack of knowledge. There's no lack of information. There is so much out there. It's just whether or not I just believe this more and more as I age, that, that it is divine timing for every soul to be ready for that. Be ready for that
Mhm.
information at that, and it's the time for them to take it and alchemize it. Maybe they took it in before in a different way and it just sort of sat there on one level, and then it, finally sank in. And I don't know if there's anything outside of just, well, that was that person's divine timing, that there's anything outside of that, because someone could go through the exact same process or the exact same set of circumstances, and then go through this set of tools and practices, etc., and just come out completely different, or not ready, or just there's I think there's very little outside of us, external to our own inner clockwork, or our own unfolding, that can make that happen. It's like, oh, well, like you were saying, like when you had the mystical experience and then you were ready for it, the teachers arrived, the books arrived, right? It wasn't that they weren't there before. It's just that your energetic field was ready and open to that. And
Exactly.
so I like, I think it's a good reminder for people who may be in a place where they're feeling disheartened or down on themselves for not being more advanced in a certain way, or not being in, having the tools and the resources. Yes, you can get those tools and resources. There's so many teachers and guides that can help. And yes, take that all in, but also give yourself that grace to unfold in the manner that you're meant to. And
Well, it's also,
and
there's a couple of things that you're saying that bring to mind. One is every soul is operating from a certain age. And this teaching that I'm going to share, it comes from what's called the Michael teachings. And Michael, similar to like Abraham teachings and the law of attraction, are not in physical form. And this is kind of distilled information. But when I heard it from a shaman here, who I respect very much, he and his wife have 45 years been going to the Amazon, and he actually has a school of shamanism. He's a published author, but he shared this teaching with me, and he said, Jana, you had a rough upbringing. He said, but were you ever aware that there were other people that had it worse? I was like, yes, all the time. As a child, it's what got me through a lot of the painful circumstances.
mm,
Was like, okay, This too shall pass. I started to realize that I talk about it in the book. Things are temporary. I started to have this awareness. And then I would watch certain shows on television back in the 70s of, tribes in Africa or places where I saw, oh, well, they're having it worse than me, and so I said yes to him. And he said, that's because you're not an infant soul. And I
Mhm.
had never heard this term infant soul. Have you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have heard about soul's age and things, but maybe
Yeah.
not
So
through his
yeah, infant
lens.
soul, this Michael teachings teaches us. So infant souls deal with survival.
Mm,
So so going on a spiritual journey is not the path of an infant soul, because they need to make sure, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They've got to have their basic needs taken care of, right? This is a luxury to do this deeper work often, right? Because people
mhm,
are going to a job and stressed, and, that's not even in their field of awareness that there's higher consciousness and they're connected to everything. This is just, whoa, woo woo. That's like,
mhm,
they don't even understand. Like, why would anybody even be interested in that? I got to pay my bills. Survival. Then the soul continues to grow on this earth plane. It becomes a baby. Babies have stranger danger. They seek to make others like themselves, right? And so a baby's soul is usually characterized by rules and dogma and doctrine, religion. They seek to make others like them. They go to war for it. There's a lot of conflict in the baby soul age. And then we move to young souls. Young souls are very materialistic, very much about success and money, looking young. Then you move to mature souls. They're all about relationships, interpersonal, like really developing relationship, because we're always in the mirror of relationship. And then old souls. And that's the one that most people know of, old soul. Old
mhm,
souls in the early stages, according to this teaching, are all about making a difference on the planet. The reason why you have this podcast, who you are as a person on this planet, and me, the reason why we're brought here together is because we have a commonality, because we're old souls, right? Because
mhm,
we look at things, we know we're here for a purpose, we're here to give back, we're here to connect, we're here to share. That's an old soul, early level. As they advance, they're in ashrams and monasteries in the Himalayas. They check out from the material householder game, right? They're no longer a
mhm,
part of it, because they're just holding space for the whole planet to evolve. So once I understood that, it gave me a lot of compassion, because my
mhm,
family of origin, as you know, were very fundamentalist Christian. And I don't have a relationship with really any of them, because they view me as different than them. And that, is very Christian of them, very loving of them. I have a deeper relationship with Christ now than I did then,
mhm.
because I endeavor to live his teachings, which is love my neighbor as myself. Well, I'm going to focus on loving myself so I have enough to love my neighbor. But you don't go to church and learn how to love yourself. So
Yeah.
there's a lot, we understand there's this whole thing with religion. It's man-made, right? We're not talking about mysticism and spirituality when we talk about religion. But it does help me. So if someone's proselytizing to me, whether it's a Jehovah Witness or whoever, my heart is soft, because I realize I see them as a baby soul. Would I get mad
Mhm.
at a baby for telling me that I'm going to go to hell if I don't believe the way they do? I'd be like, oh, they care about me. How sweet, not patronizing, but
Yeah,
yeah, I
but
would
you
just,
see it that they want the best for you
yes. And they think
and
they
they're
know it. And yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
so it was
I
very
love that you
helpful.
that's so so helpful because yes, of course, old soul is such a thrown around term like, oh, he's such an old soul, and you have
Right.
someone comes, you have your friend's kid, oh, such an old soul. You can experience that in yourself, but I hadn't thought of the other stages. Obviously, an old soul, then there's all the other stages here living in existence, coexisting.
Yes.
And you brought up the conversations with Christians type of thing. I didn't grow up with a lot of religion in my life, but
Hmm.
I became a seeker early on and a mystic to find and connect to divinity in my own way. And so I was rolling with that. And I had an experience getting picked up by, I was hitchhiking and I got picked up by someone who was a devout Christian. And he, of course, that's, I knew that because it's the thing, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, have you been saved? And okay, now we're going to have this conversation. And we, in our few hours ride, had a beautiful conversation
Mhm.
about, you know, living in, the footsteps of Christ and living this life that is, I'm describing it in my way. He's describing it in his way. And so we got to the end of the ride and he was like, "Are you sure you're not a Christian?" Like,
I love it.
no. Yeah. But we're just describing things in the same way using different
Yeah,
terminology, right?
totally. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. That's beautiful.
So now the work that you're doing, you've manifested your current life and you're living into your the dreams that you continue to create, and as you said, your purpose continues to shift into to new things, and the awareness of that is so important, right? That there's not just, okay, I've got this purpose that I was given at 12 and now I'm going to go out and do it. Like, it can evolve. Now someone's purpose could be solid right at that time, and then they take this whole incarnation to achieve that. But I think it's great to be open and aware of that shifting that you
Mhm.
mentioned. So what's shifting for you now? Where do you feel yourself headed to in this next phase?
I was listening to a Martin Luther King. It was the lyrics of one of the talks he gave, or a prayer or something he said, and it was like it moves me every time I hear it. Actually, Kelly Clarkson sang this song when she won America, or the year after she won American Idol, and it's called Up on the Mountain.
Mm.
And he says, I hope I don't cry when I talk about it because it's very emotional to me, but it's this, Gandhi, all the great ones have had a yearning, a push, Martin Luther King as well, that no matter what, like, I know I'll never retire. I know that I'll be a teacher till I take my last breath. And I think just asking every day, like, how can I be used up? How can I serve? I'm certainly not perfect at it, but how can I give of myself? Like, I don't want to be on social media, but I finally had a shift around it writing the book that, it's a way that I can share these messages through reels, through little minute, 90-second, drop of wisdom. It's my dharma, and I have to keep doing it no matter how tired I get, no matter how I just want to, I love to travel and things, and I haven't been able to do that for a while because my work is consuming me right now, right? There's just so much. And but it's such a blessing, and so I mean, if you're asking me projects, we have our next book already working on the emotional healing system, a practical guide to help people understand this system. It's certainly not anything I invented. I took it from 6,000-year-old teachings of Vedanta and my teachers, and, yogic philosophy and psychotherapy and spirituality, and just brought it all together. What I feel is fundamental for people to understand in a worldview, and then practical tools to help them. And my husband's co-authoring it with me. So we're working on that. We just are launching an online retreat. It's like, I guess the question is constantly, how can I serve more? Like, what else should I put out into the world? Also, we created a nonprofit, and, we offer a lot of scholarships to our group retreats, to our private intensives. Because I was a single mother for 7 years, I give single mothers who apply often full scholarships to come here and work with us
Mhm.
free, which are usually around $10,000.
Mhm.
So, just always asking, how can I be used up so that I know when I take my last breath, I gave it all.
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful message for everyone to just sit with yourself and ask, how can I serve? What's next for me? How can I serve? And to get to that place and to be sitting where you are and be living to tell this and
Yeah.
sharing this. What a gift. Thank you so much, Jana, for
Oh,
sharing all of your
thank
beautiful
you.
wisdom today.
Thank you.
Everyone go out and read Wise Little One. It'll be launched. What's the date again?
July 12th.
Okay, great. So right around the corner, actually, probably by the time this airs, it will have launched. So I'll, of
Okay.
course, include all your links in the show notes and make sure everyone can connect to that and buy it
Perfect.
and read it and gobble it up like I did.
Oh, thank you, Carissa. This has been wonderful.
You're welcome. Thank you. Awesome.